Hey, folks. Zach Osterman, Mike Niziolek, Bloomington General Times, Indianapolis Star, Lake Michigan. It's gorgeous up here. This is Northwestern's athletics facility, and the lake is literally right there. Absolutely gorgeous. If you're an Indiana fan, you think the evening's gorgeous pretty much wherever you are. Indiana 41, Northwestern 24. The Hoosiers are 6-0, 3-0 in the Big Ten. They're the first bowl eligible team in the country. And Mike, I think that the first takeaway really from postgame was nobody really wants that. I mean, Kurt Signetti and pretty much to a man, his players, at least the ones that we talked to, nobody wants this to be the end. Nobody wants this to be anything resembling satisfaction. I understand why fans would celebrate it. If you're an IU football fan, there's no reason not to celebrate it. But just know that your coach and your players have far bigger dreams.
Yeah, and if you didn't get to see it, I watched his coach's show on Thursday, and he talked about, look, this team hasn't been tested yet. We haven't been down 21-0 in the first quarter. That Maryland game really wasn't. He didn't view it as competitive, especially in the second half. Today, they didn't trail. They weren't down 21-0, but it's 27-24 late with 10 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. Defense allowed some key scores and key moments, and Northwestern kind of stayed close. This was as competitive a game kind of deep into the third and fourth quarter that they've played all season. And he finally said this: we passed the test, or at least passed this first test. And that was a good thing for him to see. And he admitted the defense didn't play particularly well today. The numbers are okay. I mean, they only allowed 336 yards, but this was against a quarterback only making his third career start. Really did not look downfield very often at all, to be honest. At 243 yards, only 3 passes over 15 yards. So defense let him get loose on a couple of third downs. He scrambled. I mean, it did not look like a pretty game for Northwestern, but they stayed in it. But still, IU answered on the road, and I think that's what he likes, to kind of see this team show some grit, show some toughness. And that's what they did. I mean, you talk about, I know you liked Elijah Surratt's game, and he kind of exemplified, I think, of the team that Kurt Signetti believes he has.
Yeah, first, very briefly on Northwestern, I think a lot of the talk around the line and how badly Northwestern struggled at Washington ignored the fact that they did come off their bye week. They got a bye week to try and fix some things.
But IU did cover. We should.
No, they did at the end, yes. But it's more kind of this idea. I think there was a perception, at least among some of the fans I talked to, that Indiana might roll in this game. I said I thought Indiana might have a little bit more trouble. I didn't necessarily think they would have this much trouble defensively. But the flip side is, you say defensively, Indiana also puts up 529 yards of offense. It scores 41 points on the road. That's 5 straight 40-point games now.
Something that they have never done.
Yeah, so that's never happened. Okay. And you feel like you're starting to see this formula develop for Indiana. It's the depth at running back and wide receiver. So many different guys can get involved. Surratt had a really big game today, 7 for 135. But then Keyshawn Williams has a couple huge plays, the 52-yard sort of catch and run through a bunch of tackles, and then the late touchdown that's probably kind of the game ender, basically. In fact, I think it is the last score of the game. Miles Cross has a big touchdown catch early on. 7 different receivers catch a pass. I asked Curtis Rourke about it after the game, how fresh Indiana can keep that offensive backfield. Your 3 running backs go for 14, 10, and 5 carries, but they average 4.9, 5.2, and 6.6 yards per carry. This team can it can score, and it doesn't feel like it's because, 1 or 2 guys are just really, really hard to stop. It's because there's a lot of balance. There's a really good mix.
You want to talk about
there's a lot of depth. And then you got a quarterback that pulls it all together so well.
A lot of teams, too, scheme over talent sometimes, or gimmick plays over talent to make up for it. He was saying that, look, we had this 5-yard and out slant that was just crushing them and letting the guys go to work. And that's how we were doing it. So, it really was the receivers sort of Surratt especially carried guys, 3 defenders over the first down line like twice in the game.
He is very physical.
Keyshawn Williams, he had a play that was just, I thought his response was like, how do you, when you're trying to decide, like when that play unfolds, like what happens? He's like, I just black out and run. It's like, spin move that made like 4 guys dive at him and miss. And so, and that was the other thing, it was a competitive game, but it never felt like Northwestern was going to be able to win, because it just never felt like they were going to be able to get a stop.
Never felt like they were going to be able to get control of the game. Yeah. That's where the whole question of a stop comes. And I think it was 10-7 at one point, Indiana. It was 17-10 at halftime. Indiana was only up one score at the beginning of the fourth quarter. So, I mean, it wasn't like this game, as you said, was really uncompetitive. It was tight, and at least certainly tighter than what Indiana's faced so far this season for a lot of the game. But Indiana had an answer to everything Northwestern did. And it was, where I would kind of compare it to Maryland. And I think you talked about this after the Maryland game, but I'm sometimes one of the things I find interesting when I go back and rewatch a game is to watch it knowing what the result is. And you sort of, you just sort of like cut away all the emotion, all the tension, all the, this is the back and forth of the game and what's about to happen. When you know the result, you can kind of watch both sides and have a certain sense of like, yes, it's close, but this team's in control and this team's hanging on. And I think you really saw that against Maryland. I agree with you, I guess, with Kurt Cignetti as well, that this game was tighter. This game pushed Indiana farther. But the flip side was, I suspect, on a rewatch of this game, you would be watching the late third quarter and the fourth quarter, and you'd say, but Northwestern is emptying both barrels just to try and hang on. Like they needed that 50, that it was basically a prayer that Indiana's. It was in the double coverage
in the air for I think 10 seconds,
and Amari Farrell just couldn't find it. Like he was looking over both shoulders, and by the time he found it, it was too late. But that's a huge play. I thought the D'Angelo Pons pass interference in the end zone that might have been a third down stop on 3rd and goal was maybe a little bit 50-50 given what they'd let both sides get away with through most of the rest of the game. The point is,
everything had a break right for Northwestern to even kind of be there.
Yeah. And ultimately, it's yet another week where we're sitting here and we're critiquing Indiana's performance. Because listen, that's what you got to do when a team gets better. You don't just say, "Wow, they're great." You say, "Okay, but how can they get better now?" Expectations have reset. They're bowl eligible at the minimum number of games. Nobody's thinking, how can we get to 6 wins anymore? Nobody's thinking, how can we get to a winning season anymore? Now it's, Mikael Kamara said they want to win a national title, but
I think he said natty.
He did say natty. Yeah. That was the word that came out of his mouth. But if nothing else, it's sort of resetting to say, well, now it's, can Indiana win out at home? Now it's, can Indiana, beat a Michigan, win at Michigan State, whatever. Can it become the kind of team that can get to double-digit wins and maybe put itself in the playoff conversation at least? This team still hasn't trailed. Not for one snap in 6 games has this team trailed. That's remarkable.
2 things stand out. I mentioned this to Kurt Cignetti. That was actually one of the bigger smiles I've seen on his face at the podium when I pointed out that they've outscored teams in the first quarter 73-0 through 6 games. He's like, we haven't allowed any points, right? As if I hadn't just said that. He's like, no, yeah. He's like, that's pretty good. Huh? It's like, yeah, that's really good. And so, they've been able to dictate every game they've played in, essentially. The only game they didn't score in the first quarter was Maryland. They scored in the first play of the second quarter. And they didn't allow a first down in the first quarter in that game. Today, they allowed 1 first down, only 4 plays for positive yardage. They've been able to dictate sort of all these different games and kind of gotten off the right foot. You saw them kind of, once they got on the scoreboard, they rattled off 7 straight scoring drives. The other stat that stands out, and you've written about this, the red zone, 7-7 today. And the continued success in the red zone and the continued sort of, they've just been able to run the ball well there. Or both, did Allison and Lawton have a touchdown? So
I've seen more explosive Indiana offenses, some of those Kevin Wilson offenses that could just, but like I've never seen an offense anywhere near this efficient. That when you put them
inside the 25-yard line, where a lot of teams,
I guess they weren't great on 3rd downs today, but in general, like they were one of the best teams in 3rd downs coming into this game.
Yeah.
Again, as you say, one of the best teams in red zone situations. Like they are just
a lot of teams have. I think a lot of high-power teams that I've covered have struggled inside the 20 when things get shorter because they aren't able to take advantage of their athletes as much and things are boxed in. This team's going the opposite direction. They just have total confidence. They distribute the ball. It's not just one guy that's sort of leading the charge. Look, the running backs, Allison and Lawton, I think 13 touchdowns combined, and I think almost all of them are in the red zone. Maybe one of them is not. And then the passing game has been just effective there, and I think that speaks to the success. That consistency is really hard to. Teams can't keep up with that.
Yeah,
I just think it's that simple.
And it's kind of one of those things where you think about the intangible part of it, which is the momentum of the game. And it's like teams can't take the momentum away from Indiana. Certainly not in key moments. Okay, early in this game, Northwestern gets a couple stops. Maryland game, Curtis Rourke throws those 2 interceptions. But then you want to talk about momentum. We go back to that Maryland game. Maryland runs 11 plays and gets no first downs. Or what is it, 13 plays and gets no first downs off the 4 turnovers Indiana commits in that game. This game, Northwestern had a couple moments, and obviously the atmosphere in the stadium is always going to be a little weird. It's very small. It's it's right on the lake. It's whatever. But there were a couple moments, especially when they got it to 27-24, where you thought like,
Well, the loudest
this is an old Indiana moment. Are they teetering?
The loudest I got was that 3rd and 10.
Yeah.
And Rourke just threw to Surratt, and it was over. It was like, and they just calmly just dissected the defense. And it was like, okay,
Yeah.
next play, and then they went on to score touchdowns. So,
but it's like this team, the efficiency just allows for no sense of momentum to build, for no sense of
they don't leave it opening. They don't leave it.
No, they don't. And listen, I mean, through 6 weeks, I think they've probably played one bowl team, Maryland. I think. I mean, that's what I would be comfortable sort of saying at this point. And I think Maryland might be off this weekend, so I don't know.
Yeah.
Where they are, but they're 3-2, so it's reasonable to see them get to a bowl.
But let's reward our.
Well, hold on. We'll get there. We're going to get over there in a minute. We're going to get over
right.
to some of the comments in a minute.
All right.
Roll Tide, cream and crimson tide. That's a good one. Somebody commented, did Alabama actually lose? Because we can't check that score while we're talking. I guess you can check that score. Vandy, wow,
that is one of the biggest upsets.
There's someone who grew up in SEC country. That is like Bill Murray, dogs and cats living together.
Coming off that Georgia win too,
mass hysteria, like that is in time stuff.
That is the rat poison, right?
Thank you, Terry. 40-35 Vandy. But they are going to get tested more. And it's funny. I asked Mikhail Kumar basically, did the buys fall at the perfect times this season? They play 6 games, buy 3 more games, buy 3 more games. And it's almost like you kind of we talked about taking that first month as its own block, or those first 4 games, really. Then the second block is almost like the first 6 games in a way, because of what they do in the first 4 and how you're allowed to extend that because they're winning. Now it's like you get to 6-0. You're going to have expectations coming out the other side. Big noon kickoff. I think Nebraska won today too, is going to be in Bloomington almost certainly for 6-0 Indiana versus 5-1 Nebraska. It's going to be the most important game of the Big Ten that weekend. Maybe one of the more important games in the Big Ten schedule all year long. Then you got Washington and Michigan State. The point is, now you can say your expectation ratchets up a notch. The pressure does too, and so does the competition. And so now the question is, can you go back into the lab, as people like to say, during the bye week and obviously get healthier, but sort of talk about, as good as these numbers are, when we start getting ready to play better competition, can we go up that level? And can we go up that level when it's Nebraska, or when we're in East Lansing, or when it's Michigan at home? And I think that's the next question for this team.
Michigan State team's not very good.
But it's East Lansing. It's a rivalry game. I mean, I think it'll be tricky.
Well, let's get to
all right. So
question. So we had a reader, Terry Davis, I think was the reader or listener, asked about Curtis Rourke in terms of the Heisman and should he be getting consideration. He had really good numbers today. 25 of 33, 380, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. He was already in the top 5 in the Big Ten in basically every category: yards, touchdowns, quarterback rating. Any way you slice it, he's right there. I think he's 3rd in completion percentage, 73 coming into the game on the season. And so, what are your thoughts on Rourke?
Yeah,
I'm getting national.
I'm looking at the national numbers, not just the. He was 15th in the country in passing yards coming into this game. He's probably, I mean, because you look around, like obviously these numbers will not have anyone's numbers yet.
Right.
I think they'll have Kyle McCord's because Syracuse played last night. I mean, he's going to be, as things stand, he is going to be in the top 10 in the country probably on Monday morning in passing yards, passing touchdowns.
Percentage.
He's going to be in the top 10 to 15 in, where is he?
No,
there
6.
He is. He's 6. Okay, so he's going to be in the top 10 in completion percentage, because I think he completed a greater percentage of the passes today.
I think it was even. 76.
76. So his number is going to creep up a little bit there. Obviously, he threw the 2 picks last week, but like that's 2 picks in 6 games is a very good number. I think the answer to that question is frankly, if Indiana keeps winning, then I think with these performances, yes. But what I would say is, if you're asking me, and this is, I guess this almost speaks to like kind of a wider question that we all have to evaluate in our own way during the bye week, maybe, is like, how do you start evaluating Indiana when it stops being Indiana against last year's Indiana, or Indiana against, Indiana like the stereotype of what IU football is, or even Indiana against like another team in that sort of vague middle of the Big Ten, somewhere between like 6 and 14. And it starts being Indiana against the best teams in the country. That's like that. That's because if you take Curtis Rourke's numbers and you put him up next to Cam Ward's, he's not that close. And Cam Ward, I think, plays tonight, if I'm not mistaken. So, if you take Rourke's numbers and you put him up against some of the best quarterbacks in the country, he holds his own, but he's not necessarily like outperforming a lot of them.
The efficiency numbers don't get rewarded, right?
I think they do, but I think they do if they sustain because you're winning, and that's where I come back to kind of the more Indiana wins when he has these performances, the further he's going to push into that conversation. It's just kind of like that question almost frames itself against a lot of what I think we've got to do with Indiana now, which is basically stop asking, how much better is Indiana than what we expected them to be, and start asking, how good is Indiana compared to the teams that can dream as big as anybody in America?
Well, and frankly, I think they're a little almost too balanced for him to sort of break through.
I agree with Terry Davis that he's better than Carson Beck so far this season. Carson Beck is also a screen merchant, so I don't have really a lot of time for him. But
they're so balanced, that Rourke doesn't sort of pile up numbers like a lot of the quarterbacks that have, pure better numbers than him. I mean, he's Sanders. He was attempting 14 more passes per game than Rourke is, and so I think that does hurt him a little bit. That this team is so balanced right now that Curtis Rourke has rarely had to sort of put it on himself and sort of take over a game. Today he did a little bit, but he got help from his receivers. But I mean, there hasn't been a moment, I think, through the first 6 weeks where it's been all Rourke. I mean, he had the UCLA game.
I think the UCLA
as
game
close as it came.
Yeah,
but
and I think he may get something similar. I mean, I would be a little surprised if he doesn't at least win a share of Big Ten Player of the Week, Offensive Player of the Week after this game too. 380 and 3 scores on the road.
We haven't seen what else is going on across the league, but I mean, I think he's on the edge of the conversation. And like you said, if they keep winning, I think certainly he's deserving of the spot. And
certainly if he goes for 380 and 3 scores against Michigan, then
if there's a game,
different.
I mean, if there's a game, if he leads them to win a victory of OSU and has that on his resume, I mean, that's going to carry a lot more weight than, great games against teams like UCLA and Northwestern, which are probably going to finish at the bottom of the conference.
And that's kind of where I go back to what I was saying more broadly, which is it's about this question that we're going to need time to answer, which is how do we reset all of this and start weighing Indiana against the best teams in the country rather than Indiana against, whether you want to say some of their, historical peers in the Big Ten, or you want to say against preseason expectations or whatever. They're 6-0, and they're 6-0 impressively. They are not squeaking by here. They have no wins by fewer than 14 points. That's, and you've played 6 games, 3 of them in the conference. I don't care who you played. That's impressive. The point is Indiana's earned the right to have its own sort of this conversation reset. And now it's a question of what they do. I mean, I think that Nebraska game, and we can kind of round it off here. I think that Nebraska game is a big one because I would be surprised. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Nebraska won today. I would be surprised if Nebraska is not ranked on Nebraska. Yes, Nebraska won 14-7. So that wasn't, but they're going to be 5-1. I wouldn't be stunned if Nebraska was ranked for that game. I think big noon kickoff will be in time for that game. Game day will almost certainly either be at Georgia, Texas, or Alabama, Tennessee.
Well, now Alabama out, man.
Well, then Georgia, Texas.
Wow. I think it has a shot. I really do.
I think Pat McAfee was
stumping for it. I think it has a shot.
I think it's a lot more likely that the Big Ten's primary television partner is going to be bringing its morning pregame show, dueling pregame shows. I think the point is, I think that Nebraska game is going to be a bit of a kind of a platform for Indiana, because the country's been paying attention, like increasing amounts of attention. But if you are one of the highlight games for one of the big TV networks on a meaningful Saturday in October, in what, again, I think has a decent chance to be a ranked matchup, and you play like this, whether it's Curtis Rourke, whether it's Elijah Sarrett, whether it's Mikel Kamara, whether it's IU's offense, defense, whatever, you play like this and you win. That's when I think people start to wake up and start to say, like for example, talking about the Heisman thing specifically, Tevin Coleman's 200-yard game at Ohio State was the one where it was like, oh, this isn't just a good season. Like, because that was, Indiana was struggling to pass the ball. They had a freshman quarterback, Xander Diamont. He was certainly trying his best, but he was a true freshman, and he was being asked to run a whole offense, and that's just a lot to ask of a first-year quarterback. So Indiana was leaning heavily into its NFL caliber running back, and that meant defenses knew Tevin Coleman was going to get the ball, and they still couldn't stop him. And it was that 200-yard game at Ohio State in 2014 when it felt like his season shifted, and Indiana lost, but it felt like his season shifted from Tevin Coleman's having a really nice year to, hey, he kind of needs to be in the Heisman conversation. And he didn't go to New York, but he did get votes. He was on a number of ballots. And that's what I mean when I say it's when you start to get the bigger stages. If you perform on those, then fair or not, 380 and 3 touchdowns is going to mean more there than it does here.
Biggest game. I mean, we kind of couldn't have fans on that one. The biggest game since the Ohio State in 2020.
Yeah, probably. I think so. I mean, certainly the biggest game. I mean, because we've talked about the 2019 game was so funny where all the important games were on the road. It's just how the season fell out. Mm-hmm. Even that Michigan game, like there was excitement around it, but no one felt there was pressure to it in 2019 because they were already bowl eligible and they knew they'd be favored to beat Purdue. And it was just sort of like, okay,
when they lost too early, I mean, yeah, it's sort of feel like this is
like that season just felt like it was all gravy after they got to 7-2. Yeah. This season, it's like, what can this team do? Like, how far can this team go? And if you're asking me my honest opinion, I think we're probably talking about 9-10 wins. I'm not sure we're talking about a playoff team quite, but I'm not prepared to.
I think people, the perception of Indiana, people go all in if they beat Nebraska because the wins that they have do not, like you've mentioned, one bowl team maybe, and 2 of the worst teams. UCLA might finish as one of the worst teams in the country. Like these aren't bad teams; they're really down. And so I think it matters that game to sort of. It's a big one. I just think it's going to be a. And I think both teams coming off the bye. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
And so the chess match there with the coaching staff, having those extra time to sort of game plan and get everything set up. I think it should be a sort of a fascinating matchup as we get here ready for the second half of the year.
We'll leave it there for now. For Mike Niziolek in the Bloomington Herald Times, I'm Zach Osterman from the Indianapolis Star. Thank you so much. We got a great turnout today. We will keep doing these. And we got a lot more to do because Nebraska, Washington, then the basketball exhibition to Tennessee. It's all going to kind of get rolling here pretty quick. We'll podcast next week. I think we never really got around to our media day takeaways. Some of them more relevant than others. But we'll be back next week, whether it's talking a little football, a little hoops. But until then, thank you so much for watching or for listening. As it may be the case for many of you, to mind your banners. We will talk to you soon.